Welcome back to our channel. We want to thank you for watching. In this episode, we are looking on why Macron's crusade to renew France's role in Africa has failed. The French president promised decisive improvement in Francophone-African relations, but his misunderstanding of the stakes involved and the method needed have meant total failure. Moving forward, the promises sounded great, sometimes generous, bordering on naive, but with time, they shattered on the implacable reality of a France-Afrique relationship that proves difficult to transform. And so it was that at the end of his first term, President Emmanuel Macron, who had promised definitive upheavals in France's African relations, had to content himself with very conventional relations with his main partners, who were reluctant to let themselves be carried away by the ephemeral enthusiasm of a head of state who was mistaken as much about the stakes as about the method. The return to the starting point is all the more painful for Macron as it occurs in a situation in which France is forced to admit that it no longer has the means of its ambitions and that it is losing grounds even in the traditional sphere of influence. At the start of 2023, countries long considered part of the French backyard of France-Afrique like Mali and Burkina Faso fought back, inflicting a new affront on Macron by expelling the French ambassadors in Bamako and Ouagadougou. What were the reasons for this particular decision? Just the latest in a long series of setbacks for France diplomacy in Africa. A few weeks earlier, two eminent French ministers, the head of diplomacy, Catherine Colonna, and the interior minister, Jeo Biden, had traveled to the Rabat and Algiers to restore normal consular relations after a year of dispute. Looking ahead, the crisis has been triggered by a French decision to drastically reduce the number of visas granted to Maghrebs to try to force those countries to take back stands and also their national spending illegal deportation from France. But the measures was lifted virtually without any backings in return. Badly though, out and implemented in a cavalier way, the measures was supposed to trigger or target the nomenclature of the countries concerned, but it turned out to be without significant impact and was even counterproductive. This episode also reveals that those who suggested this type of decision entertain a caricature vision of the Algerian decision-making process. To think that it is possible to put pressure on Algerian leaders through visas is also very absurd. If you look at the different promises that have been made by the French state, however, before such failures, Emmanuel Macron, then presidential candidate, had made hopeful promises. He spoke of a new partnership, of the end of France-Afrique, of a common future to be charted for both sides of the Mediterranean, and of a future to be offered to the youths of Africa, to spare them the perilous adventures of the clandestine migration. But for this to happen, it was necessary to invest massively in Africa, to train, to dare to explore new paths. Macron insisted on being the initiator of the new course by establishing what he considered to be a direct dialogue with those societies through their youths, the civil society, their artists, their intellectuals, their public opinions, and their elites. A few highlighted publicized stages and moments have dotted into the route. In Burkina Faso, in November of 2017, 6 months after his first presidential victory, Macron has descended into an arena of students to debate face-to-face at the university with very upset interlocutors. He also accepted bitter criticism but did not mince his own words. Thus, when asked about visas, he replied to an applicant for immigration that it was more legitimate for him to think about building his future in his country rather than thinking about exile. A few days later, he repeated the same exercise in Ghana, affirming that Europe must have a policy of cooperation so that a young African can tell himself that he is going to succeed in his own country rather than dreaming of an ex-European El Dorado. According to him, saying that the speech was courageous and daring, but Macron had neither the means nor the instrument nor the partners to carry out those projects. Moreover, Macron's speech revealed a denial of reality that it's difficult to understand at his level of responsibility. In terms of security in the Sahel, for example, Macron highlighted the French efforts of Operation Barkhane to counter jihadists in the region. The jihadist surge was largely the consequences of the destruction of the Libyan state following the 2011 NATO intervention, in which the France of Nicolas Sarkozy played a central role. We have made lots of videos on this particular channel. If you are new here, we encourage you to check the entire channel for you to see more exciting and educating content regards the global African perspective. Without any more delay, let's just dive straight into it. Previously, the countries of the region had suffered a century of colonization, followed by half a century of France-Afrique. What benefits did they actually derive from it? Some of them, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and also Central African Republic, still sitting high on the list of the poorest countries in the world. With such a disastrous past, what interest do they have in remaining under the supposed protection of France, especially since, apart from a fake also discourse on the democracy and human rights, France, including under Macron, does not hesitate to deal with regimes that do not meet democratic criteria, like in Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and also Saudi Arabia. Moving forward, if you consider the two audiences that the country of France is facing at the moment, in addition to his own contradictions, Mr. Macron had come up against pitfalls, both internal and external, that he did not suspect. There is a hostility of the powers in place, who can no longer accept the attempt of a foreign leader to address directly their public opinion by bypassing the government and also its institution. Some countries have nevertheless agreed to play the game. Macron then found himself confronted with two types of public. The first conquered was the composed of Francophile circles, business circles with which vested interest and also the visa applicants. The other, the most numerous, was the skeptical and even hostile. That second audience found itself critically expression in the recrimination of nationalist, Africanist, Pan-Arabist, and also Islamist movement or milieu, sometimes openly anti-French and very widespread in those particular societies. The appearance of new Africanist circles navigating between radicalism and also popularism, such that by the Franco-Beninese Kemi Seba, the president of the NGO Eugene's Pan-Africanist, further complicated the picture. However, how can we explain this series of errors of appreciation and the lack of foresight on the part of the president of France? The French head of state seemed to have been seduced by intellectuals and also activists with a strong presence in the media world. Looking forward in looking at the particular legacy, he also entrusted one of them, Achille Mbembe, with the Dar initiative, a meeting with African elite to circumvent the traditional Franc-Afrique summit. But that approach had no impact. Macron managed to attain the sympathy of some circles of renowned intellectuals, but these also with no political or social anchorage in looking at altering unrepresentative of their own society. The real legacy itself regards to France's own perspective, more down to earth. The President Macron also found himself confronted with the reluctance, even hostile, of the traditional French diplomacy embodied by the Qui au Ose. French diplomacy is indeed more sensitive to the real interest of France, including economic interests, that is so moral principles and noble causes. This implies that France must develop and maintain a rapport with foreign leaders who hardly accept the democratic canons praised by Macron himself, leaders who must be spurred in order, for example, to preserve the French presence in Chad or French nuclear industry that relies on the uranium from Niger. This erroneous perception of African realities pushed the French head of state to look for scapegoats to explain his setbacks in Africa. He thus ended up developing a kind of fixation, even a phobia, about the Chinese, Russia, and Turkish presence in Africa. Relayed by most of the French media, Macron's speeches respectively warned against plundering of Africa by China, the attempt at Russian hegemony, or even the negative influence of Turkey. A futile and pitfall discourse in the facts of reality, has then been a more intense looting of West Africa than that of colonial and neo-colonial France, a more destructive hegemony than the French hegemony, a more harmful influence than that of France. Even the discourse on the dangers of the presence of troops from the Russian Wagner Group is totally ineffective. Historically, the French army remains the foreign military force from which Africa has suffered the most. Brandishing a virtual Russian threat cannot hide the real legacy of the past. This is why the President of France has failed in his pursuit with regards to renewing the relationship with regards to these particular African options in dealing with Francophone Africa and the African continent at large. Hopefully we've informed you with regards to the reason why the President Macron's crusade to renew France's role in Africa had failed, and let us know if you think that it's going to be a challenge for the French state to be able to reinstate itself in the region, looking at the interest of Russia, the United States, European Union, and also other countries like China who are currently competing for positions in the region. I want to thank you for watching. Looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.